Ty, what if I told you that a lot of companies are overpaying for SQL Server and Windows Server licenses by 30 to 50%?
I'd say show me the receipt. That's an awful lot of money we're talking around.
Look, here's a kicker, Ty. They're locked into enterprise agreements or SPLA deals that were made 5 years ago and they made sense then, but they're bleeding money today.
Whoa, wait a minute. You mean to say those great deals from Microsoft aren't that great anymore?
Well, Ty, plot twist. Pay-as-you-go licensing in Azure is crushing traditional licensing models, and most IT leaders have no idea.
Okay, hang on. Now you've got my attention. So, time to save some serious cash. John, show me how.
So, welcome back to AZ Bytes. I'm John.
And I'm Ty, and today we're going to save you and your company potentially an awful lot of money on licensing costs.
Yeah, look, that's right, Ty. We're diving deep into the licensing switch that everybody's kind of talking about in a way, moving from enterprise agreements and potentially service provider license agreements or SPLA to the pay-as-you-go model on Azure.
So by the end of this episode, you'll know exactly when to make the switch, how much potentially you could save, and the gotchas to avoid.
Yeah, plus we'll give you kind of, the exact calculations you can use to take to your CFO with a bit of luck.
All right, John. So set the stage. What's wrong and how companies, or should I say, what's wrong with how companies are licensing today?
Yeah, look, straight away, I'm going to preface all of this by saying there is nothing wrong with the models that companies are using today. But look, there are alternative options that we're going to explore for sure. Here's the deal. Most companies signed an enterprise agreement 3 to 5 years ago with their infrastructure looking a completely different state to what it potentially is looking like today.
You mean the era or 3 to 5 years ago when everybody was on-prem and it was cloud first as a buzzword?
Yeah, you got it, Ty. They committed to that minimum spend in licenses. They bought licenses for their peak capacity usage. And now half their servers are sitting idle running in Azure, right?
Well, yeah. Or what about SPLA customers?
Yeah, potentially even worse. They're paying monthly fees for licenses that might not, they might not even be using, with really zero flexibility and the additional administrative overhead of managing it all.
So let me understand. In effect, we've got customers stockpiling licenses and potentially not using them and having minimum flexibility.
Yeah, you got it, Ty. And pay as you go is like only really for paying for that gas that you're actually going to use. Yeah.
Okay, so that's got a real good reason for people to look at these deals, or why did they sign them in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely, Ty. So EAs, look, don't get me wrong, they made perfect sense for those predictable on-premise type workloads or hybrid workloads. But look, cloud changes everything, Ty. With dynamic scaling, variable workloads, those hybrid environments. Yeah.
All right, John. So now I think I get it. So let's talk numbers, because CFOs don't really care about flexibility. They care about dollars, pounds, or yen.
Yeah, got you, Ty. Get ready for this. We've seen companies out there cut their SQL Server licensing costs by, up to 40%, Ty, by switching to pay as you go.
No way. 40%? Are you sure that that's not a rounding error? Is that's real money? Are you sure, John?
Look, going into a bit of a working example, company A with 50 SQL Server cores under EA, let's just say they're paying $180,000, on an EA annually, and that same workload, we can get them down, pay as you go, $110,000, $108,000.
Wow. I mean, that's $72,000 back in somebody's budget. How is that even possible?
Tie two magic words: dynamic scaling. Yeah, right. With PayGo, you're only paying for those cores when you're actually running them.
Oh, wow. I thought you were going to say abracadabra. But so we're not talking about magic. We're on about scaling down when we're not using it, or seasonal dips.
Yeah, and look, they save the money automatically, so there's no paying for that. Look, what if capacity, right?
Okay, so next question from me then, and our viewers is going to be, what about Windows servers?
Look, Ty, even better. Windows servers on pay as you go. They include patching, they include the updates, and they include support. So there's no separate, that software assurance fee that we would pay traditionally.
Hold up a minute then. So what we're saying is the customer can potentially save money and get better service as well.
You got it, Ty. Plus there's no more true up audits, no minimum commitments, and you can kind of scale up and down instantly. Yeah. Okay, look, Ty. When is this going to all make sense? Let's be smart about this. Pay as you go isn't necessarily right for everybody. Okay.
Here we go. Reality check. Give me the bad stuff. When should you not switch?
Okay, so if your business is running those steady state workloads 24/7, no variation, let's face it, EA may still be the best option for you, okay?
So you mean the old school stuff? Servers never sleep environment type place. Is that what you mean?
Exactly, Ty, but here's what's crazy. How many companies actually have that anymore?
Well, I'm sure some would say all my environments are like that, but really, with modern workloads, probably development environments, test systems,
Yeah,
not many.
exactly, Ty. Look, most environments have got this natural scaling pattern that has never really been explored. Dev and test, do we not shut those down on nights and weekends? What about seasonal applications? What about burstable workloads that can scale up and down?
So the sweet spot is variable workloads, yeah?
Variable, hybrid, or anything that doesn't run at 100% capacity 24/7, which should really be basically everything.
Perfect. Another question that I can hear our viewers saying is, well, what about compliance?
Yeah, no, absolutely great question, Ty. So pay as you go is going to include the same compliance benefits as your traditional licensing model, but you get that additional cloud native security on top.
Okay, so this all sounds a little bit too good to be true. What are the traps that companies and organizations can fall into?
Okay, yeah, biggest mistake looks simple, not really understanding what your current usage patterns are before you do the switch, okay?
Right. So you need to do your own work first. That's what you're saying, yeah?
Absolutely. We've got Azure Migrate, run that, create an assessment, understand your peak versus your average usage, and map out what scaling opportunities your company has got.
Okay, and what about existing EA commitments? How does that fall into this?
Yeah. That is, arguably a little bit of a tricky part because, you might have penalties for early termination of an EA. Often the savings might still outweigh the penalties, so you could look at that. Also, you may have an anniversary date that you can kind of maximize that minimum commit level that you need to adhere to. Also, it's the familiar, the similar is really true with those SPLA agreements. But rather than an annual basis, you're looking at monthly basis with SPLA. So basically, check out your existing agreements so you know really where you stand.
So it's not just homework now, it's maths homework problems, yeah?
Everything's a maths problem, Ty. Right, calculate your current costs, project those pay-as-you-go costs, factor in any penalties, see which one wins.
And don't forget to include operational benefits. No more license management. There's none of them overheads. Everything like that is going away. So PayGo is an fully automated service, not like EA's or SPLA where you can lose hours and hours of admin.
Yeah, you got it, Ty. Exactly that. So look, I guess let's get practical. Let's get practical here. How do we actually start and make the switch, right?
Well, I'm assuming because you can't just flip a switch and change your licensing model like that, can you?
Well, exactly, Ty. So look, let's start with pilot workloads. Pick, say, for example, your dev test environment, or find a variable production workload. Okay,
Absolutely. So test the waters before we're diving in.
you got it. Yeah, migrate them to Azure with PayGo licensing, or if you can't migrate, make sure you configure Azure Arc to get those PayGo pricing models enabled across your hybrid estate. Measure the costs, validate what savings you've just achieved.
Okay, so then we're going to expand based on his results.
Exactly right. And here's the pro tip: coordinate that with your EA renewal time. Don't renew when you're planning to migrate. Okay.
Exactly. So this then becomes a strategic move and not a panic decision.
Ty, best licensing decisions are made with data, not emotion.
Okay, John, some rapid fire recap questions. Are you ready for this one? When should organizations consider this switch right now?
Okay, one, if your workloads have any variability. Two, if you're paying for capacity that you're not using. 3, if your EA is up for renewal or you're close to an anniversary date. And SPLA, take a look at how you're currently being billed. Are you being billed on US dollar? Are you being billed on GBP cost books? As you'll no doubt see varying opportunity for savings, but it's going to be a minimum of 50% savings across SPLA, okay?
Okay, next big question. What's the biggest overall benefit?
You're only paying for what you actually consume. Just keep that in mind. Plus, you get all of those cloud native benefits.
And the risk of waiting?
Look, every month you delay is money left on the table. Simple as that, Ty, right? So, and your EA renewal might lock you in for another 3 years, and you're going to have to wait. Okay, Ty, let's talk action plans. Okay, so we can get our viewers really to kind of go back to the CFOs and get those elements of gratitude from the CFO back to them, right?
Absolutely. So first, you're going to run the Azure Total Cost of Ownership calculator. And for his viewers, the link's in the description. But make sure you're using and you've got real numbers.
Yeah. Second, use Azure Migrate to assess those SQL and Windows Server usage patterns, remember.
Yeah. Third, calculate your potential savings. And by the way, feel free to contact your Microsoft account team should you need to.
Yeah, and here's the big one. If you're within 12 months of that EA renewal, start the conversation now.
Finally, don't just renew blindly.
Yeah, this could be the difference between wasting money and funding that next big project that you need to do.
So guys, subscribe for more money saving Azure tips. And remember, every dollar or pound saved is more money available for innovation.
Good stuff, Ty. Right, thank you all for watching, everybody. And we're going to see you all on the next episode of AZ Bytes. Happy saving.
Bye.